All right, welcome back to
Oh,
another
yes.
episode of Office Hours. Here we are.
Things are working as planned. Can you hear me okay? I'm in
I
a
can
new
hear you just
location,
fine, yeah.
trying all sorts of new stuff.
Yep.
It has been a good week so far. We're having a lot of fun. We had a great session on Monday. We had good questions.
Yep. Two actually.
We had two sessions. And yeah, and I've been looking forward to this all week. One of the things that we talked about on Monday, first of all, we want to try to expand, make this more available to all of our community that's around the world. So we're going to start to, test out new times during the day. We want to make it so that everybody has a chance to come visit, ask their questions. And we want to keep people aware of what's going on. I've been talking a lot about reading the release notes. And we have this as ours. Like I just said to Dan off camera, I said, this is not the lecture. This is office hours. Bring your questions. That's the primary thing. But it could also be an avenue for us to kind of share what's new. We want to be able to show the roadmap. We want to be able to give people hints as to what's coming. And one of the things that we identified on Monday is we have these releases. We have the calendar, which we always look at. Maybe I should pull that up. Let's pull up the calendar since we are at the top of the show. I'm going to do this. Let's add that. Boom. Our calendar. Is that the right? It's May, right?
Sure is.
Where are we at?
Almost Memorial Day.
So look at this. It says here that Spring Authorization Server 0.3.0 and Spring Cloud Release 2021.0.3 are coming. Okay, little did I know that meant, hey, they're going to be released today. There's a lot of work that goes into that and making that release, and we're definitely thankful for everyone on the Spring team for making that happen. But what I did was reach out. I reached out to the Spring developers, the Spring team, to see like, hey, maybe we could coordinate something where as these releases come out, we bring the people that are working on those releases, bring them in and let them explain like, hey, here's some of the things we did. We can definitely go through, and I think we want to go through those release notes and just keep everybody aware of what's coming because a lot of the times these are requests, these are updates that we're getting feedback from the community, and we want to make sure the community knows when those things are being improved upon and upgraded. So that was the big deal. That's what I wanted to do today. So what I do know is those releases are probably not done yet, but that's okay. That's okay. We on Monday, we had a two-parter, and we talked about, just a proof of concept example where, hey, somebody had a question, they brought it. It was a kind of a rough outline, and we discussed two different approaches to that same problem. And Dan definitely got further than I did in that short amount of time, but I continue to work on it, and I'm having fun with it. And one of the other pieces there is we want to make sure that those types of examples, those best practices, those current practices are being, kept up to date as well. So this example that I'm working on with the team's help, I think I'm going to go ahead and take that and just make it, hey, here's some more example code, but throw it up on our developer site, developers.tanzu. VMware Tanzu. What is hold on, let me pull it up. Developers. I don't have that bookmarked. It should be at the top. Should be
your first one.
Yeah, let's throw that into our chat. And this is such a good site, such a good resource. And what we'd like to do, what I think I would like to do, is start to provide more of these patterns and practices that we see. Again, there's tons of ways of implementing these things, but I think the patterns for the most part are similar. But the pieces that you use, the libraries, the way you're implementing things, those can be very, very different. And I think it's good to show those differences.
Yep. Cool. I had a couple of things to share this morning.
Awesome.
I'm going to share my screen. just things I found this week so far. I thought this was interesting. An interesting tweet from our friend Machai. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I should know that because I've known him for years, so I apologize. But he had a question. It says, is it Spring GraphQL or Spring 4 GraphQL? Not that it matters, but the naming seems somewhat not unified. So it's true. We have things like Spring Security, Spring Data, Spring Cloud, and this is Spring for GraphQL. And someone commented in here with the answer, and there is the reason for this naming. It is Spring for GraphQL. And somebody here on the Spring team, Brian, answered and basically said, yeah, GraphQL is a trademark of the GraphQL Foundation. So GraphQL was started by Facebook in 2012, open sourced in 2015, and given over to a foundation so that they wouldn't be kind of the only ones looking over it. So now this is run by like many companies, and they have official guidelines for names. So the lawyers get involved, and you can't call it Spring GraphQL, so that's why it's called Spring 4 GraphQL. So I just thought that was interesting because I had the same questions. And then there's a really good article on the Spring.io blog, Preparing for Spring Boot 3.0 from Phil Webb. Just a really in-depth article. He says, where are we at here? Somewhere in here, he says, like, hey, we're kind of 6 months away from this. There's still not a specific date, but we know that there's a major release every 6 months. And hey, if you want to start thinking about Spring Boot 3.0, here are the things that you can do. So things like, hey, we're going to upgrade to Java 17 because that's going to be the baseline. Hey, get on Spring Boot 2.7.x now. If you're on like 2.3 or 2.4, you're getting a whole bunch of things out of the box for that, including performance improvements, security, things like that. Check for calls to deprecated code. One of the big things is, hey, if any of the third-party projects that you're using have Jakarta EE9 compatible releases, because everything that is in Spring 6 is going to be referencing Jakarta EE, and there are some things that change there, specifically like the namespaces. So check that out. Try the Spring Boot milestone. So if you have a project that you're running now that you're thinking about moving to Spring Boot 3.0, try out a milestone and just play around with it locally and see if you can upgrade and see if there are issues there. And if there are, raise those issues to us. This is a good time to kick the tires. So you don't want to be kicking the tires in production when 3.0 is released. And then finally, commercial support, consider that because you'll get a lot of support from us as far as getting help when you need it. So just a really good article by Phil. So go ahead and check that out.
Excellent. I'm changing locations and moving stuff around, and my mouse is inverted, so I'm having all sorts of difficulties. Like, why isn't it not scrolling? Why isn't it not scrolling?
That
the other things I saw.
That is the first thing I do when I get a new MacBook. They always say like the scroll position is like regular. I'm like, it's wrong for me. I got to invert that.
Maybe I'm old school. I don't know.
Yeah, that might be it. We are kind of both old school. So.
Yeah. And yeah, speaking of Spring Boot 3 and Spring Framework 6, because of my position, because of what we're doing, the example that I worked up on Monday that I'm going to continue to work on this afternoon in our code show, I took the milestones. I took the milestone releases of 3.0, milestone 3, and yeah, it's so far so good. It works. The out of the box works. Right now, I'm just kind of doing some cleanup, but what I plan on doing this afternoon is I'm going to take plenty of time, but just kind of go through that same example that we worked through on Monday. I'm going to run it locally, build it, kind of go through all the things, but then I'm going to take it hopefully one step further and do that native build, and let's see if that works. Let's do that Graal VM, build those static binaries, and see if I can get that working on my little humble 16 gigabyte laptop. So yeah.
Somebody said my audio is coming through distorted. Oh, yeah,
I thought that was just me. I thought that was me. Thank you for that update. I really appreciate that, Cloud Surfer 22.
All right, how about now?
Oh, that is so much better.
Much better.
It's like you're here. It's like you're right here.
What the heck,
I thought it was me. Headphones, new situation.
I always use this mic. Why is StreamYard going with the AirPods? That's the AirPods. I don't know why the AirPods don't sound good. They sound good on a Zoom call. So why? I don't get it. That's all right.
Yes. Thank you so much. And it's that, like, hey, we're here. You're here. One of the things I was thinking, like, what are you working on? Like, if you're a person that's just kind of like hanging out, listening passively, or you're getting ready to go to work, or you're finishing up, what are you working on? We want to know. We want to understand where you're at. We want to get your feedback so we can help move things forward. We don't want you to be stuck. That's for sure.
For sure.
And if there's no other questions, I could scoot over and I can kind of show what I did for our Monday example. So
that'd be great.
Pull that up. One more sec. I think I have it. Oh, I didn't even have it. Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah, hopefully we can see that. And I should probably add one more share. Oh, I can only add one share at a time. Okay, hold on. We'll get there. Says, what are your thoughts on porting existing Spring Boot app to AWS? That is a great question. You know what? I'm going to just jump right into that. So I've been doing things using functions, having fun with that. And one of the things is there's a lot to consider, right? So that always the it depends is important. But the cool thing about what we have in this Spring ecosystem is we have history. We've got these massive libraries. The ecosystem is massive. And there's a lot of people that have contributed a bunch of things to kind of help make those types of decisions easier. So the idea of what does AWS Lambda provide? So first, maybe let me ask you a question if you don't mind answering. What are you considering? Why are you considering moving to AWS Lambda? And for those that don't know about AWS Lambda, this was kind of the big first commercial offering of serverless. The idea of these functions that can run, they can be deployed, and they can sit at rest, not doing anything, and you're only going to pay while they're being consumed, right? And we talked about this on Monday, this idea of, hey, if I'm not using it, why is it up? Why am I paying for it? If it's only being called 40 times a day, does it really need to be running 24/7? So this is just one thing, but the idea is, I'm going to maybe draw a picture, is you have these different layers of abstraction. The first one, so this is a good question, overcoming on-prem costs. So I'll try to take a run at this. And again, anything is, this is office hours, and I'm going to try to tie it into what Spring provides. But overcoming on-prem costs, I have a opinion that depending on your situation, it's really on-prem is actually the cheaper way to go. And I'll say it as I sit here. If I have something that's not going to be executed very often, I can maybe run it on a Raspberry Pi. This is a Raspberry Pi. And yeah, having the right data center, the right infrastructure for your resources is important. The cost of modifying something for a particular cloud, for a particular runtime like AWS Lambda, there's a cost associated with that as well. So if you,
but would you say that if you were just going in and creating something new, that is an opportunity to look at it first and go, okay, now cost is a real viable reason to move to a function. You're saying if I'm going to convert a whole app into this function, there's a lot of overhead there.
There's a lot to think about, right? So yeah, what is the cost currently? Will we actually get those realized benefits? Will we get that savings? And when we're making decisions like this, I like to start with that hypothesis. If we convert our Spring Boot app to Lambdas, we expect that we will have some savings versus our current on-prem costs. Is that a valid hypothesis? Maybe. We also, I think part of that hypothesis is that the value received at the end will be worth the investment at the beginning. The time that we're going to take to modify our Spring Boot app, maybe it's a monolith, maybe it's already microservices, that time that we're going to take to make it fit into that AWS Lambda framework will be worth it in the long run. So it depends on the app, right? It depends on, what's the scale? Go ahead.
And when you say like converting an existing Spring Boot app, I mean, most apps don't do one thing. They do a ton of things. So you're talking about extracting a whole bunch of functionality into different, Lambda functions. And, it's a great question because I think, me even probably a year or two ago, anybody getting into like hearing about Lambda, I think the first question is, well, what is the use case? Like, why would I use that? So your kind of thoughts on it, as far as like, if it's not running all day, then why should I pay for it? Great. But what are the functional features that I can build in here? Because not everything belongs in a Lambda, right? Like, these are kind of those one-off things that happen and don't stay up all day. So I think it'd be really good if we could put like a guide together. If there's one, I'm sure there's one out there by now, of like, these are the different things that if you're trying to build Lambdas, these are the use cases for that, right?
Yep. So yeah, we're having a conversation in Cloud Server. I'm just saying, I appreciate you sharing. Implementing as microservices in Lambda. So we're getting a little bit more details. So I'm going to kind of lay out that picture of what are the different layers here. At the bottom, hardware. I can grab a Raspberry Pi, right? I can deploy that thing. And a Raspberry Pi for a single Spring Boot app is much cheaper than anything I can run in any cloud 24/7. Above that hardware as a service, perhaps, you have that infrastructure as a service where you can go and grab a virtual machine, the virtualized infrastructure, vSphere or EC2, etc. Above that, you might have this containerized workloads where, hey, I've got containers, I'm using build packs, and instead of deploying jar files or VMs, I'm deploying just the containers, and I've got some way of orchestrating that. And then as we go, those apps, right? Those containers are typically one application per container. But then beyond that microservice, in general, that microservice might also have more than one thing that it's doing, right? The AWS Lambda approach is one thing. You get one function on an endpoint. So all of those endpoints, if you're doing CRUD, create, read, update, delete, and it's purely a, let's say, Spring Data REST service, you're going to have a function, that work will be converting that CRUD repository. You'll have a function for each one of those endpoints that you're wanting to support. So instead of deploying that one Spring Data REST application, now you're going to need to deploy functions for create, read, update, delete, list, etc. So you're going to change some of that infrastructure. You're going to have to deploy things separately. How often are you going to change the create endpoint? As I think, I would probably not be using Spring Data REST. In that case, I might want it to be as fast as possible, right? You're paying for that startup time. You're paying for the execution time. You could really optimize each of those, but you might lose the ability to use some of these other abstractions on top. That cost savings might not be realized as easily in that time to develop the time to develop those 4 or 5 functions might be significantly more than the time to deploy something like Spring Data REST against that same infrastructure. So these are all things to consider. The nice thing about deploying to AWS Lambda is that we already have a lot of those functions built in. We have the adapter, the AWS adapter, that allows you to take a Spring Cloud function and deploy that function to AWS with 0 code changes. It's literally just adding that dependency to your project. So if you start by breaking out your application into functions, this might be a good approach. Instead of saying, hey, I want to go to AWS Lambda, let's deploy those same things as functions on-prem using Spring Cloud Function and evaluate the cost, the approach of changing your existing microservices to functions and see what does it take. Because as you're deploying functions, again, taking that Spring Data REST example where I have one deployment module, I have one thing to deploy. Now I would have 5 or more things to deploy for the same amount of functionality. So the work on the left side, as we're getting things to production, the amount of work and the amount of artifacts that you're keeping track of, the amount of machinery taken to or required to secure and test and validate each of those functions is going to be different. Not necessarily more or less, but different. So there's changes all the way down that software supply chain. So these are all things to consider. But the nice thing about Spring in the Spring ecosystem is if you do that experiment of splitting up your Spring based microservices into Spring Cloud functions, they could still run on-prem. You can still run those locally and develop against those locally. You don't have to go to AWS Lambda in order to implement those. Once you've done that experiment and you validated your hypothesis, hey, the amount of work here is worth the work to continue, simply add that AWS adapter to those functions, and then you're going to have to package it slightly different. There'll be a little bit more machinery of taking that jar file and converting it to something that can run on AWS Lambda. So it's a slight change, but we have plenty of examples on how to do that in our guides and our sample repositories. So I think it's worth investigating. I think it's worth experimenting, but start locally. Start on your laptop, take it for a spin. And if you get stuck, come into office hours and maybe we can help you go further. I think that was a great question. I think that
Great
you're
stuff,
not the only one that's thinking about these things. And oh yeah, there's magic there, and I only pay for it when it's being used. But
there's no servers. It runs on the fluffy white clouds.
Yep. Packaging and deploying and making sure that you're building those artifacts in a way that you can get the value of it running in AWS Lambda. That's important. And I'll say this, the infrastructure cost, and this is something that we've talked about here, that might not be the only approach. I can take a Spring Boot app, a RESTful web service, for example, or something, Spring Data REST. I can deploy that application to something running on Kubernetes and have it scale to 0 in Kubernetes as well. So what I would be doing in that approach is not having to rewrite my infrastructure, not having to rewrite my application, but I could still get the value of having it scale to 0. So I'd still be running on a Kubernetes platform and Kubernetes infrastructure, but perhaps I could have more things available, not necessarily all running. Let's say I've got 100 services, but at any given time, only 40% of those are being actively used. If I'm using something like Knative serving, which this is something that I'm going to talk about in a few hours. This is something that I'll hopefully get to this afternoon. An example of taking that Spring Boot app, compiling it or putting it into a workload for deployment on Knative serving and allowing it to scale to 0. But this is just another option. Yeah. So without doing a lot of rework in the code up front, it's just a different model of deploying and running that code. But this
I would say too, if you're kind of new to everything AWS Lambda, and you've had you have experience in Java and Spring, maybe even start with Java. Deploy like just a straight Java function to AWS Lambda before you introduce, the complexities of adding anything on top of that, like Spring or um, anything you might do in Spring, Spring Data, etc. So just learn how to build and deploy an AWS Lambda function in Java, and then, as DaShaun said, come back and look at Spring Cloud Function, and that just kind of builds on those same principles. You're still using those function interfaces, so that may be a good place to start.
So again, thank you so much for staying in tune and helping us understand your context even better. Even when scaled to 0, EKS will have a base price just for that control plane. My understanding, and maybe it's not across all clouds, but I know at least one of them, you don't pay for the control plane of that Kubernetes cluster. You're only going to pay for the worker nodes. And if you're using something like Knative serving, you can actually have a lot of those things deployed and ready to answer on a smaller number of workers, a smaller pool of resources for those workers. The other benefit here is that jump to say, oh, yes, just AWS Lambda. Are there other things happening in AWS? Are you getting other benefits by going to AWS? How much of your on-prem resources are you actually consuming? Is this something that's low volume or only spiky? Maybe it's only working during the trading hours for the stock market or business hours as retail or something like that. There are other ways of doing that. There are other ways of optimizing your resource usage. But
yeah,
go ahead.
I just want to say, great point on are you going to AWS for other infrastructure pieces? Do you want to use their SMS integration? Do you want to, send emails from there? Do you want to connect to one of their cloud databases? If that's the case, that's a great reason to move there, right? Because you're moving away from having to manage databases and sending emails and all of that stuff. So if you want to take advantage of that on the Amazon side, yeah, that's a great reason to move there. I was actually just looking at, so anytime you do anything in a front end app, like in Vue or React or Angular, sometimes you need server side stuff. Hey, I want to sign up for a newsletter. This is a great reason to use something like a function, because this is not running all day. Somebody submits a email address, you want to save it into a database somewhere. Call a cloud function that basically inserts it into a managed database somewhere, and you're done with it. And that happens, I don't know about you, but I only get about 5 email newsletter subscribers a day. If you're a little bit more popular, even 100, you're saving a lot of costs on that not being up all day. So I just want to say, great point on if you're moving to AWS for a lot of those managed resources, that's a good reason.
RDS. Oh, my cloud database. I've been here. I think I've been in that situation where, oh, hey, now I've got all of this infrastructure. It's running these databases. I'm using this microservice approach. So each of my microservices have their own backend. We're following the 12 factors approach. And I'm managing this infrastructure to run databases where maybe that's not the best approach. Maybe it's a massive data set. I've got this huge data set, but the interaction to that data is few and far between, right? You have different things that you have to negotiate with. Take all of these trade-offs into consideration. But is RDS the right solution for your data set? Is the AWS Lambda and RDS the right solution? Having this ability to validate and experiment, just like I said before, take it in small chunks. Don't bet the farm on one approach or the other. Do an experiment. Use the abstractions provided by Spring. Use the things that you know about deploying microservices following 12 factors or 15 factors, and set yourself up for that type of delivery. Then I would recommend, if there's nothing else, if it's only AWS Lambda and RDS, if that's your approach, look at the other clouds as well, right? This is the nice value. This is where we are here in 2022. You can't choose a cloud based on popularity. I think that your cloud should reflect your consumers. Who are your customers? Where are they? How is it going to best value your customers of that service and that data? And evaluate each of the clouds. because we have those same abstractions, we have those adapters, so you can take your Spring Cloud functions and you can run them in GCP. You can run them in Azure. You can run them in AWS. Take your data set and deploy it. The thing that I learned by taking my data from on-prem into the cloud is that 3 nines SLA that's provided by RDS, for example, isn't enough for my customers or my investors. The changes, the things that are different from on-prem and in the cloud are you're at their whim, right? They have their update schedule. And if their update schedule is during that time of your busy schedule, you're out of luck. To get the value, to get those higher SLAs, there's a lot of changes that are required in order to make sure that things are working the way you expect. On-prem, you've got a lot more control. In the cloud, you've got a lot more abilities. You can move a whole lot faster, but there are differences. You don't have as much control over things like updates, OS updates, and software updates, right? All of these things are on a different schedule than what your business might be comfortable with, right? These are all things you need to consider. And this was an example, again, scar tissue from my past where, hey, surely AWS can run a MySQL database better than we can with our small engineering team. Absolutely they can. They're definitely going to have a better uptime than what we could possibly provide. Except they're also going to do all of the updates. All the updates that are coming, all those CVEs that are coming, they're going to do those updates and they're not going to ask you when. When is the best time for you and your customers? They're going to deploy them. So beyond just using RDS, you're going to have to consider, what can I do to give the same user experience to my customers, my business, my investors, et cetera, if I do make that move to the cloud? Because things are not going to be under control as well as they are in the data center. All good things to consider.
Yeah, great point.
Great questions.
Just as we're talking about cloud, I remembered something from yesterday. So Azure Spring Cloud is now Azure Spring Apps. So this was announced yesterday at Microsoft Build, I believe that's what's going on. But I'll include this in the show notes. And the reason I bring it up is just, I think, I'm wondering if others have the same questions that I do. I think when it comes to, okay, so we built our app, let's get it into production. There are so many different directions. I think there's like 2 buckets and we have 2 different, two real different conversations based on what bucket you're in. I am just a hobbyist. I'm deploying like things that are fun to work on. Maybe I got this idea for a startup, but it's like, this is an MVP that I'm going to deploy. Yep. So I think there are 2 very different buckets. When people say, how do I get to production? It's like, well, what are you doing? Because those working at a Fortune 500 company have a very different story to tell than what I'm telling as just like a hobbyist. So love your thoughts on that. I know you pulled up the good old Raspberry Pi there. As a hobbyist, what are your options?
I had a really good conversation. We're here, right? We're working on stuff. We're experimenting. We're working with startups and Fortune 500, Global 2000 companies. And what I think right now is a lot of us are remote. A lot of us had that data center that was easy to develop against in the past, and maybe some of us still do, but a lot of us are still remote. And this idea of like, hey, I need to do some experiments. I want to deploy some things. I want to have things up and running. I was of the mindset that, hey, I'm going to go ahead and get that hardware and I'll run it locally. I could stand up a small Raspberry Pi Kubernetes cluster and I can do a lot of really, really cool things on $100 worth of hardware that sits next to my laptop. I can have that deployment model. I can have that machinery that's building things. But a good friend also said, why wouldn't you just do it in the cloud? Why wouldn't you just do those experiments and spin the meter while you're using it and spin it down when you're done? Not everybody has that, and everybody's budgets are different. I like to ask who's got an unlimited budget. Typically, 0 hands are raised, and yeah, that's what it takes.
I think pricing. the confusion around pricing scares people too, because you read all these horror stories that somebody put something on the cloud and 30 days later they had a bill for $10,000 and like, where did that come from? So I know, like, I've done work on Amazon before where you can put billing
Limits.
notifications and limits in place. But yeah, that's a scary thing too. And it's, again, if I'm on so my personal website, like I'm not paying $100 a month to host it. I make $0 off of it. And got 2 kids to feed, man. So, where does, oh my God, it's so so like where do you put, when you say let's put it on the cloud, do you have thoughts around like where's like kind of budget friendly things that you can do?
Yeah, there's tons of options, right? It depends on what you're deploying. But I think here for this office hours, we're talking about Spring, right? We're talking about Spring apps, things that are running on the JVM, things that we want to have this best practices. We like Spring because it allows us to do things quickly. We're comfortable with the patterns and the way that we're doing things. And it makes that meantime to dopamine, it helps, right? I know how to get Spring Boot apps out the door. I can now use this Spring Cloud function, and I can do similar things with functions. But where do you send them? I always talk about, you got to get it running on your laptop first. And there's a really exciting talk that's coming up at Spring I/O around modulus, right? This way of maybe I don't need all the different microservices and I don't need to deploy 20 different things. Maybe it can exist in one application, one jar file that's getting deployed. If you can deploy like that until you need to do something different, you can take that jar that's developed in a way as a modulus, so you can easily pull things apart. And you could take that one jar file, that one application that does all of the things, and you could deploy that to something like Azure Spring Apps, so that you don't have the cost of, I've got 40 different microservices. They could be in one application, and you could save on some of that cost. When the cost of deploying and releasing becomes more important, the cost of agility becomes more important than the cost of hosting something, then you make that change. But to start, you got to get it working.
Yeah, I think I need I think what I'm going to do, again, I always say these things and I have like 50 things on my plate, but I would love to like come up with, I have so many ideas for like little just things to like put out there. And I want to like build something and then go, okay, as a hobbyist, let's take a look at my options for deploying this, and then deploy it out there and see what works and see what doesn't, and see what's going to cost me too much.
That's a great idea.
Maybe share that research with everyone, because
that's a great idea.
I gotta believe
something. Yeah.
And I think where this sparks from is over the last 4 or 5 years, I've done a lot more work on the front end. I've been a big fan of Vue, and services like Netlify and Vercel have really changed the game for front end development, because before you had to like buy, hosting somewhere. I'm dating myself, right? You had to buy hosting. You had to like FTP files up to a server somewhere. Like, it wasn't like it was easy, but as a newbie, it was, there were some roadblocks to getting started. Nowadays, you just drop a folder on a free service and you have a website out on the, out on the internet that everybody can see. And I think that's where my thought process is like, how can we make that easier, for everyone else that's working on back-end applications too? Like, what is that direct line to getting stuff out?
That's a great idea. And there are tons of options, and we can talk about a few, right? Every cloud has a free tier. And as I work with startups a lot, it's always a great idea to understand the free tiers and what you get from the free tiers and how you can best leverage those. But every cloud has a free tier, and you can actually do quite a bit in the free tier of these different cloud providers. I think that's a great approach. It would be nice to deploy a Spring Data REST. I want it up and running. What are my options? Where can I deploy that one thing that's out there and running, like the API that we used on Monday, right? Where can I deploy someone and have it up and running 24/7? And we could just start with one, like, hey, here's an example, and it fits within the free tier or it doesn't, or it's going to cost you whatever, 22 cents a month, we
Yep.
could definitely explore that.
Cool.
But yeah, great idea. Great idea. That move from the cloud or from on-prem to the cloud. I've been doing this long enough and with enough customers where I understand, or I at least have some sense of when is a good time to move to the cloud. It's not when you're trying to save money. I don't think that saving money in the cloud happens very often, but it depends, right? There are different circumstances. What I see and what I've already seen is as we're taking these workloads to the cloud, we're doing it for reasons other than cost. We're not trying to save money by doing that. We're getting the value out of being able to move quickly. I don't have to order servers or order racks for this infrastructure. I can move quickly. Yeah. I can deploy it now. I can have that quick, short mean time to dopamine for the business, right? But as you're developing, as you're trying to keep up with features and you're deploying things, it's nice to be able to say, hey, now that thing is in maintenance mode, or we've scaled up and we're hitting kind of our market share and we're happy with how things are running, but now it's really expensive to run in the cloud. And I've dealt with enough customers that taking that application, it was great, and getting it up there quickly was really, really important for us to capture that market share or other. And now it would be much more affordable for us to bring that back on-prem. And I've seen that with enough customers already. So yeah, make sure you're thinking big picture. Keeping yourself aligned with the business and the goals of the business is super important. And I like Marcin has always kind of said that, like, we're here as developers. It's always a good idea to understand we're trying to make money for the company. We're trying to save money, save time, make money for the company, and to keep those things in mind. It's important. And the more that we can think like that, I think the more beneficial will be to our employers and our orgs. But Cloud Server 22, I definitely appreciate the questions. That was a good conversation. Hopefully it helped. So I'll plug later this afternoon. I'm going to do a code session. I plan on going about 2 hours where we'll talk about the example that we explored on Monday. But yeah, we'll try to take it one step further and let's talk about what it looks like on our laptop. Let's talk about what it looks like deploying. Let's see if we can maybe find one of these low cost or free tier options for deploying an application.
Cool. Just while we're waiting to see if we get any other questions, I want to mention, you mentioned it earlier, but Spring IO 2022 in Barcelona happens.
It's sold out.
Sold out. Happens tomorrow and Friday. We talked about this Monday. This is on my list. I got to find a way to get there next year. So I'm excited. As you said, there's some things coming out of Spring IO that we should listen for. Spring IO on Twitter said, would you like to see the keynote live stream tomorrow? And I said, heck yes. Please do that. So if you're on Twitter, go over and like that.
let's find
Make
that.
sure you let them know.
Happen.
Yeah.
Yes, let's go.
That'd be so cool to see. So
retweet that for all the goodness. I need to make that happen. Yes.
Yep.
Hello. Where is it? Awesome. Well, this was good. You and I both have another appointment here shortly.
Yeah.
So if there's no other question, we can give it a few more minutes. If anybody has any questions, nothing is off the table. Bring your questions. What are you working on? And maybe you don't have questions. Maybe you're doing something that's super easy, and you're excited about it. Maybe you would like to come on and share like what you're working on. That would be great too.
DaShaun and I have already been in talks with a couple guests, so this is not always going to be just the two of us or even both of us. There'll probably be times where one of us is out, but really this show is, for spring office hours, so anybody can jump on and kind of help out. So we are working on some guests. If you have something you want to come on and share, let us know. So I wanted to mention Spring Cloud Function here. We talked about it a couple of times. So if you head over to spring.io/projects, there's a Spring Cloud Function. This is a great way that is kind of higher level, not really locked into a specific vendor, but this is basically building out the business logic of those functions. So if you want to learn more about Spring Cloud Function, check out DaShaun at some point. And but check this out first. I would go through a lot of the documentation here. It's really great. And it's crazy how easy it is to create a function and deploy it.
And full transparency, I am making a transition to this reactive and functional approach to software development. So I'm learning. I don't have everything figured out, but I think that's part of it, is kind of sharing as I go, and we can all learn together. And I don't have all the answers, but I've got Slack with the people that do. Great question.
Are workshops recorded and publicly available? I do not know this.
I would think that workshops from a conference are not recorded.
True.
And not
Workshops
available.
are the kind of where conferences make their money. They gotta make some money to pay for. I mean, conferences. If you've ever had a $5 can of Pepsi, you know exactly how expensive conferences can get. So that's probably where they make their money. But I don't know. A lot of regular sessions usually end up on YouTube. Let's do a quick check.
I would say if you're looking for insight into something specific, look for webinars as an affordable approach to go and find some of that type of education and enablement. And I happen to know that June 9th, there is a webinar on using Spring and Tanzu and Redis together for that multi-cloud real-time data approach that a lot of customers, a lot of partners are looking forward to. But how to get started? We're going to be doing a webinar, myself and my good friend Lars, June 9th. So look for that.
That'll be awesome.
Yeah, I'll also say.
So
what are you looking
here's
for?
the Spring.io website. This is the Spring.io YouTube channel. I know it was virtual last year, but here are some recordings from last year's conference. So, and then there were 2 years ago where people are in person. So I would say yes. Some of these are going to end up on YouTube. I don't know if all of them do, but as DaShaun said, I don't see any workshops on here.
Maybe not the workshops.
Yeah.
I like workshops to be a little bit hands-on. It's hard to kind of record and share that.
Yep.
But if you've got something specific that you'd like a little bit more insight onto, let us know. Right? Maybe that's something that we can have.
We are a workshop. That's what we do.
That's what we do. Excellent. Well, all right. If there's no other questions, maybe we could wrap it up. And come back for code this afternoon.
Code this afternoon at what time? Is that 3 p.m. EDT? I think.
Yes, 3 p.m. EDT.
Yep.
2 p.m.
All right. So we will check you out on code, and I believe we will get our next spring office hours scheduled for probably Monday.
Yeah. So we want to talk about these new releases, and we want to kind of practice, like, what does that take to go over those? So I reached out, and I have a confirmation with Steve Riesenberg, who's handling the Spring Authorization Server 0.3.0. He is delivering and wrapping and deploying, taking care of that release as we speak. And when he's done, we're going to coordinate a time, an office hours. So stay tuned. We'll coordinate an office hours to purely go over the release notes, what to expect, what's changed, what should I be looking for out of Spring Auth Server 0.3.0. Stay tuned.
That's awesome. Yeah, so it just crossed my mind that we will not be on Monday. Monday is Memorial Day, so maybe look for us on Tuesday. I don't know what you're doing, but I have a lot of cookouts in my future. So
I have plans to be somewhere around water. Hopefully it's not rain, and it's the time that I can put my feet into.
There you go. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining Cloud Surfer. I would say thank you to everyone for the questions, but I'm going to say thank you to Cloud Surfer for all the questions.
Yes.
We really appreciate it. This is what it's for. Come back in the next episode. Bring your questions. Let us know what you're working on. Before we go, I'm just sitting here today, chatting with you, and I'm just like, this is my job. I get to sit here and talk with you about this stuff every, 3 times this week now. And we, it's just a fun conversation, but we also get to find out what
people are kind of running into, what are their questions, and we get to take that and build stuff from it. So this is a dream for me. I'm having fun. So I appreciate everyone. I appreciate you for helping me with this, and I appreciate everyone who's coming out and watching these shows. So with that, we will see you in the next one. Have a great day, everyone.